and welcome back to the Wizard's Respite Sanctrum, the show that we dive into all things TTRPG, tabletop role-playing games. We're going to have a real fun show today. We're going to be discussing role-playing, character creation, tips for new players, tips for players that, maybe are trying to up their game, and tips for seasoned players that maybe want to learn a thing or two. Maybe there's one tip that you've never heard before. As always, I'm not alone. I'm joined by my co-host, Zachariah from Old Man Gaming. Zach, how are you doing?
Hi, Wiz, Ash, whatever I'm calling you today. Well, I'm so excited for the Sanctrum. We actually promised this episode last episode, but then we did War Stories because we had to do War Stories. That was just too cool that we got such a good response on Twitter. So I'm kind of excited to do this. Just talk about, character theory. These kind of episodes end up being my favorite episodes because it's just usually us talking about a mechanic and the theory behind that mechanic of role playing,
Yeah.
And I just love that. And then we've got 2 more episodes. We're doing good. We got more episodes planned coming. It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be a blast. And yeah, I'm right there with you. I like this type of topic too for a couple of reasons. We're really into TTRPGs, but not just playing the games. We like to talk shop. We like to look at the systems that they've made, how they work, why they work. And I think this is one that is going to be really good for a lot of people, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how they could never play an RPG or never play Dungeons and Dragons because they can't role play. Or people who played one game and freaked out because they thought that they were doing a terrible job at the role play. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of misconceptions about it, and I think this will be useful for a lot of people.
It's weird you mentioned that. I think one of the reasons I ended up being a game master first was I didn't feel right playing. I never felt like I was doing the right thing, and then it just felt easier for other people to play and me to make them feel at home. Especially there's kind of an aspect of I have a hard time. It's weird because I'm both a narcissist and not a narcissist at the same time. I love it when people talk about me and there's attention on me, but at the same time, I don't want anybody to talk about me or think I'm good. So I'm very self-deprecating, So it's weird. I started doing video game highlight reels on my channel, and I end up picking out clips where I die at least half the time, just because I think it's weird to make a highlight reel of me kicking ass. So it kind of translated into the gaming a little bit for me. It was so much easier for me to facilitate other people's experience than focus on my own experience. So this is this is really fun, and I do love topics like this. I love when you and I have been gaming for, I think we calculated it as 70 plus years between the two of us, or something insanity like that.
Add up our 2 years,
yeah, it's huge. So it's really fun to break down this thing that this core thing, which, I mean, gaming in itself exists only in people's minds. You know what I mean? That's one of the coolest things about RPGs that there is it's almost a collective hysteria, and that's what I love. It's not a video game. Somebody didn't make it for you to play. It's not a movie for you to watch. It's not music for you to listen to. It is literally shared thoughts and ideas formed together in a story that you're sharing. You're literally using almost meditative practice to transport yourself into another world as a different person. And that's just cool as hell, in my opinion,
It is. It's this sort of shared psychic space almost. It's this, you're sharing this world with other people. And it's interesting that you say that. I remember one table I played at where this is AD&D, so back then they had, and this is the weirdest attribute I have ever seen to this day in a RPG. Well, okay, it's not the weirdest, but this is the one that's always been what the hell were they thinking? Back then, they had a comeliness attribute. I don't know if you remember that.
I do not.
Had that. I think there was only 2 that had that.
Okay, I do not remember that. That's hysterical.
Yeah, it was probably one of the expansion packs. but it was essentially exactly what's how pretty your character is, how
Yeah.
attractive your character is.
Yeah.
And this one girl rolled crazy high on that scale. Like she had a 20 plus 10%. Like she was maxed out on her prettiness. And that's all I knew about the character's appearance at first. And so I thought she was this blonde princess with like blue eyes, like Cinderella type. When she actually described her character, it was a more of a Snow White, green eyes, black hair, and it was just a different look. And despite um, her having one perspective and me having another perspective, it was still this shared landscape, this shared mindscape, and it really didn't take away. Learning that didn't take away from the game for me. It didn't do anything like detrimental. I still can't visualize that character anything else other than blonde. Um, but I mean, like that's kind of the thing with RPGs. It's not just like it's our shared space. It's our own personal imagination, and it's what we bring to the characters and what other people take from the story that we're telling them.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is going to be a fun show to do, because we can open up the flexibility everybody has when they come to these tables when creating characters, and what their expectations should be when other people receive these characters.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because TTRPGs is not. It's a team sport. It really is. You can't do it without other people. Just period. Unless you're playing, your journaling games, which are awesome. But
right.
But
it's different.
Yeah, we're not really talking about those today. For the most part, making a character for a group is a team sport. It just is, and people don't always think of that. When I sit down to play Baldur's Gate 3 video game, I make the character I want to make. Fuck what the world's going to tell me, and then I'm going to interact with the world with it the way I want to. The rules of the world will be there because of the video game programs or whatever, but I'm not pissing anybody off. When you sit down at a table, it's a trickier situation. There is a vibe, there is a group, there is a dynamic to the characters. You don't necessarily want to be outside of that, but at the same time, you want to be unique enough that, you should, like, you're not just an NPC, it's a tricky situation. I've played at a lot of tables. I've game mastered a lot of tables, and it is. I'm always really happy with the people who are like. I'm both really happy and irritated with the people who come to me and go like, "Well, what should I play? What do you want me to play? What don't you want me to play?" And I have to be like, literally, play whatever you want. I'll figure out how to make it work. I've been doing this for a long time. Just play whatever you want. But I appreciate the thought process of, should I play this? Is that okay with you?
Yeah. And I think that should be something that, when we make that tip one, like, be kind of aware of the table dynamics when initially starting your character creation process.
Yeah. I think... Go ahead, sorry.
So, like, talk to the GM, figure out what kind of story it is. If you're going to be doing a really nitty-gritty story, maybe don't necessarily... Be considerate of, like, creating a character that's not necessarily a bubblegum pop type of character.
Right.
Unless you want to play that as a fish out of water type character,
I would still okay with the GM. I mean, you don't have to always swim upstream. You know what I mean?
Right.
Don't always have to be a salmon. Sometimes you can just go with the flow and still create a unique enough character in the world that it's not like you won't be recognized. You know what I mean? It's just maybe stick to it. Don't play the bubblegum character if you're playing Vampire the Masquerade. But at the same time, don't play the super dark brooding vampire in a My Little Pony RPG or something.
Exactly. Exactly. And and when you do kind of put it on your head and you do play a vampire pony or whatever in My Little Pony, think about what you're giving to your other characters.
Right.
So if you're playing that opposite kind of character, if you're playing that opposite dynamic, the first thing you have to do, I'd say, is how do my other characters react? What am I giving to them? And is this what can they take from this? And so the reason why I'm saying this is, and we've talked about this before, my favorite my favorite type of character that I like to play is a complete asshole character who's a lovable asshole.
Right.
I know I'm giving my other players something to have fun with and laugh at. If you're bringing the dark character to My Little Pony, you're bringing a character make it a character that the other characters can maybe empathize with, work with. If you're playing a bubblegum character in Vampire Masquerade, she's a con artist. She's not a bubblegum. That's her facade, and that's what she uses to get close to you. Something to give your other players.
And sometimes it can work. That is something that would work. Like you in the My Little Pony thing. I don't know why we keep using My Little Pony, but in the My Little Pony. I mean, I guess I took us here, but the My Little Pony thing. It would be really fun to have you have this brooding, super dark character, and all the other characters just constantly trying to cheer him up. That in itself is an entire game session. That is one thing that. Like, if I'm going to give any tip to a player, like, playing your character at the expense of everybody else at the table and the story, it's not always the right way to go. There are a lot of people out there who are like, play your character, whatever, play your character, rigidly play your character. I think it's more fun to try and justify character changes. Like, look, we had that... We had that war story recently with the paladin who just roasted the vampire, right?
Right.
And that's a great example here. And again, we didn't have any context there. I'm not calling that dude out again. But, like, sitting down and thinking about, like, a more complex way to play it to give your character growth. Recently, this is going to be kind of a little bit of a spoiler for an upcoming Astral Drive. I'm going to try not to spoil any of it, but we had a character, the character Nullus, played by Phil, had to do something in-game that was very outside of his character. Very outside of his character, not just in-game, but in real life. And I think those are the most interesting moments as a player, when you sit down with your character, and you don't just say, my character is this, he's going to do this, but you say, how is my character changing as the plot around me unfurls? You know what I mean? How is he becoming different? How is he becoming more emotionally mature? One thing, and I've seen this at a lot of tables, and it's probably my big cardinal, sin, I guess, to players, is players sit down, and they come up with a character in their head, and then they're like, that's the character. That's always going to be the character. That's never going to be, anything else. The best part of role-playing is taking a character who is one thing and slowly changing them into something else and justifying. Because that's the human condition. That's what we're trying to simulate. Yeah. And that's when it gets really interesting. Because I, 42-year-old Zach, am nothing like 22-year-old Zach. And that life has just changed me slowly across. Do I hold a lot of the same, ways? Like, am I recognizable? Yes, very much so when I talk. But at the same time, I am a completely different person on some beliefs, on some core ideas, some core thought processes, how I interact with the world around me. It gets really cool when you do that with characters in game. Those create the epic character moments that you're going to remember. And I fear that the players who get locked into a character, they miss out on that. They miss out on those genuinely interesting situations where you stop and you take your character and you go, wait a second. This is how he would have reacted, but would he still react that way today? And what would have changed his thought process to get him to this point? You know what I mean?
Right.
And as a game master, those are the moments I live for, to get those out of the players,
Absolutely. And I don't think... I 100% agree. A lot of players do walk in and just have a stagnant image of their character. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should make that tip number 2. When you're playing your character, look for ways... When it comes to decision making, when it comes to RP moments, look for ways for your character to grow.
Yes.
What's holding your character back emotionally, psychologically, physically in the world, and what their goals are when they achieve certain goals, when they achieve certain milestones. Think for a moment. what does that change them? What did they learn from this moment? What did they learn by defeating this enemy, or overcoming whatever?
I
That gives
think
your storytelling some dynamic.
yes, and I think sometimes D&D people need to hear that more than anybody else. Not trying to shit on D&D people. I'm not saying that. There's plenty of you that are some of the best role players I've ever seen. I'm just saying that like the gamification of D&D tends to kind of push you towards worrying about growth in the version of numbers. Okay, this is, we talked about this in a recent episode where like the two things that I dislike the most in a game is fighting and advancement.
Right.
This is why I hate advancement. I hate advancement because you want to be rewarded for your things that you get, but at the same time, you start to think about it in numbers. You shouldn't be thinking about it in numbers. The advancement that a character has should be in his character. The actual character, the personality of the character should advance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this should never be an advancement. You shouldn't get better. That's not what I'm saying. But this is why I hate the systems, because usually you end up thinking of advancement like the experience points you're getting.
Right.
Shouldn't just represent you getting better at a skill. Why did you get better at that skill? Even if the core concept, let's say you are a fighter and you get better at fighting when you get experience points, right? Why though? Did you learn how to block better? Did somebody beat you on an attack and that allowed you to kind of go, oh man, now I know how to block that attack? Or maybe you saw somebody else do swordplay in a different way, and that's something that you registered, like, oh, I'm going to incorporate those moves into my fighting. That's the way a player should be thinking about their character. In my opinion, that's the way a player should be thinking about their character first, and then putting it into numbers, And, like, I think sometimes D&D and many other rules-heavy games kind of, like, you're thinking about the numbers first. Ha! My score went up. Why did it go up? What did you get better at? What did you learn?
Yeah, it's definitely a big thing on the rules-heavy games because there's so much modification capabilities within those games. Obviously, rules.
Right.
And D&D is a very rules-heavy game. Even 5th edition is rules-heavy. And I 100% see what you're saying and agree with you. It is kind of something that holds back. It prevents this extra dynamic of storytelling and immersiveness from the reaching your game table, reaching your story. Now, I would think a couple of ways to overcome that is maybe every level, and this is just something you as a player can do if you're in a rules-heavy game. You learn something, do exactly what Zach said, how did you learn that new skill? Think about it as your character. But maybe also every time something big happens, you see a new big bad or something, or a new major clue is discovered by the party, write down a sentence or two of how your character changes because of this, how they feel about this. Do they have a new perspective? Does it double down on their perspective? One thing that...
Props to my garage game master before... Sorry to interrupt, but props to him. Every time we sit down for experience points, it's the first thing he does. He gives experience points at the beginning of a session before we start the next session. And then if you want to expend those experience points, you have to give him a reason why. It's got to be a couple of sentences. So if it's like, well, I want to increase my alertness. Why? What did you do that made your alertness better? And then you have to actually be like, well, there was this moment where I got jumped. And here is the specific moment that I'm going to quote, and that's why I got jumped, and that's why he would be more alert going forward. That right there, it's great stuff. Like, connect it to it. I'm sorry, now continue.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly to help build your character development over the arc of this story, and tell your friends that you're doing this. Tell the GM, don't be super meta about it, but kind of let them know that this is what's going on so that maybe they're a little inspired to kind of work with you on this, and you guys can all start developing a group dynamic. That's a great tactic that your GM uses, and I think that would be something that is really helpful for a lot of people as they're new and leveling up their characters to create very dynamic, interesting, and spend more enriching time in the role play aspect of it.
Yeah,
And
connect the numbers to a real world thing. You know,
yeah,
that's really what you should be doing. Why are they strong? Other than their number being high, why are their number high?
exactly. And one thing, another tip. This is not going to be for everybody. But another like let's make this 2.0. 2.1. So I'm really big into martial art movies. I used to be really big into anime, and I still am to a certain degree. But there's a certain dynamic that happens in a lot of those movies, and if you're into those things, you're going to know what I'm talking about. As characters progress through a story and they learn new martial art techniques, or they're developing their power level, that's very big in anime. There's always a moment in there where they have risen above a challenge, and that has given them something, you know.
Yeah.
And that you can look to anime, look to those martial art movies if that's your thing, for how they do it, and think my character is going from level 5 to 6.
Yeah.
He's getting XYZ. She's getting XYZ. What did she rise above? What did she get out of this? What was her internal processes and feelings? What did he like just know or learn that made him do this?
Yeah.
That brought him there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I completely agree. You really have to think to yourself too, like, and maybe this is a tip to add to the number, but when you sit down to make a character and you sit down to a table, what are you trying to accomplish as a player? Like, what are you trying to get out of it? From your player standpoint. And I know, when we talk about this, sometimes we talk about it and it feels a little bit more self-important than it is. I have nothing against people just sitting down, cracking open some drinks, and just playing role-playing games for 4 hours and it being fun. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't have to be a super intense situation. I'm not saying it does. But I still think that you would benefit from sitting down and just considering, like, what is this character going to be? Is he going to be comedy? Is he going to be, is he going to push the characters forward? Is he going to be a leader? Should I be a leader? Is there already a leader in the group? I tend to do it too much, but I always, kind of look at the group when I'm about to make a character and think, what does this group need to progress the storyline further? And then that's the character that I end up making. I'm not saying you got to do that because that's a little bit too much, but really sit down and think, like, what are we here for? What am I here for? What am I trying to get out of this? And again, I can't say this enough. Look at your group. Look at the people you're playing with.
Yeah.
Look at your game master, because you playing the character super hardcore, great, but you're not going to get anything out of it if you're at odds with everybody. Like okay, the party wants to go to this thing and your character can't justify doing that. You're going to be sitting on the sideline, and the only person's fault for that is you. Just is, I'm not saying that the game master doesn't bear some responsibility on making sure that there's stuff for all the characters. But, recently I played a gladiator game with my friends. Sat down, made a gladiator game, kind of gave them the rules of the gladiator game and what they were. If one of them had decided to make a soldier in an army, it would have been insanely hard for me to do anything with that if their entire identity was that, You had to kind of still make a character that'd be willing to participate in gladiator stuff, And, there is gotta be some level of that on the player. If you make a character, sure, you're playing your character, great, but did you really need to do it? What are you gonna get out of this? Maybe...
And
Yeah,
and don't be afraid to ask your other players. Ask the GM. Yeah. You're all friends there. You're all having a fun time, and be like, hey, guys, I really want to make this angsty character, but, I want to see how the group dynamic would work.
Yeah.
We already have a super angsty. Can I be a different type of angsty kind of character?
Right.
One game I played in, we were going to play kind of a darker group, and I wanted to play a choleric. This is how Richmond was born. And I was like, how the heck am I going to play a cleric that goes around healing people when we're playing all of us are angsty, angry people? Well, Clee's just an asshole doctor with a terrible bedside manner. Um, I got that a suggestion from another character, another player who suggested that as we're doing character creation. So talk to people,
Yeah.
make a. You're already half of you guys are already talking to each other when you choose your class or your character abilities or whatever it may be. So there's not overlap and there's group dynamic.
Yeah.
Do that for your personalities.
Yeah. There are plenty of game masters out there who are just going to say, make whatever you want, and I'll find a way to get you some content. I tend to try to be one of those. But there's also plenty of other game masters who just have a story. They want to tell that story, and they want the players to fit into that kind of story. And sometimes you got to do that. You know, the thing is there's nothing wrong with making a character that fits in, I guess, is the thing that I'm saying. I think there are plenty of people out there who are like, I'm going to play this, come hell or high water. And it's like, you don't need to play that, man. It's not going to be fun for you. It's not going to be fun with the people around you. Like, this isn't that kind of group. Like, maybe. And like I said, some of the blame falls on the game master. Game master should definitely be like, look, this character ain't going to work, you know, or something along those lines. But as a player, like, take your time, think about what you're doing at the table, and think about what you want to create and be a part of, you know?
Yeah, and GMs out there to help nurture this, I would say, you know, when you bring a new player in or you form a new table, they've never played together, be very clear about the tone of the table. Like you were just saying, there are some GMs that really want a certain type of character or a certain type of game. I would say if you're a GM that does want that, there's a certain degree there's a way of taking that too far, and there's a way of doing that right. And the way I think to do that right is broad strokes. You have a type of story, you know, that you want to tell. You have your bad guys, you know what you want them to do. But you don't want to necessarily funnel your players into having to make the decisions you want them to make, because they're never going to do that.
Right.
It's going to be disappointing for you because they're never going to do that. It's going to be disappointing for them because they're going to be confused while you're frustrated with them. Instead, broad strokes, you want to play an angsty game, let them know this is going to be an angsty world, an angsty game. That's the type of, you know, world we're going to be playing in. You want to play a levity game, something that's fun and lighthearted, tell them that. You know, like, if you guys are comfortable with that type of character, make that type of character. If you're not, then this might be a little weird. How do we make your character fit into this type of world?
Yeah. I agree. I completely agree. I think that, like, that's definitely falls quite a bit on the game master, because you're kind of the leader in the session. But at the same time, it can also fall on the player to like, just look at the water before you jump in. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's all I'm saying. Like, just look at the water before you jump in.
Now let's look at another set of tips that this one I'd really want to focus in on for new players or that have never played before, or players that are playing, maybe struggling, they're a little new, they're not feeling super comfortable, and maybe a set of tips of like how to get them feeling a little bit more comfortable just role playing at the table. You've never done it before, maybe you're insecure about it. You're like, oh crap, how do I play an elf?
That's yeah.
A common one that I have heard, and it's common because it's true, you know, if you're really lost and you just don't know how to do it, you don't know how to be it in the moment, think about an archetype. Think about the type of movie that, if it's an elf and it's a high fantasy, think about Lords of the Rings or something along those lines, a book series that you've read, and think about the type of character you want to be in terms of literal terms. Do you want to be Legolas? You know, you don't necessarily have to be Legolas, but think about all the features that make Legolas a character, and what would Legolas do in this moment? It's a first step. You're not going to stick to that forever. I'm not saying everybody should do this all the time, but if you're struggling, this might be a first step to get your feet wet.
Yeah. I'm going to add to that. Aside from the archetype thing, there's another route you can go, and I've told a lot of people to do this, and I've gotten a lot of people into role-playing gaming doing this. Play yourself as a fish out of water. Don't like give yourself a different name or anything, but I'll give you an example. I was not super familiar with World of Darkness when I started playing World of Darkness in the garage game. So what I decided to do was I made a character who is very similar to me. I'm good, thank you. Was very similar to me. He's an older man. He's a mage, because that was one that sounded the most interesting to me, but I didn't know, I could only skim the book. So what I ended up doing was I ended up making a mage who had this really weird story about a prolonged awakening to where he didn't actually awaken as a mage until he was in his 50s. And I made him a homeowner, and so I gave him the dead wife story. My wife is very much alive. But I gave him a dead wife story, and he's got his house and everything, and he gets kind of obsessed with, what he could have done to bring his wife back now that he knows magic, sort of thing, like what he could have done to fix her. But at the core, the character was kind of me, but I made him an orphan mage so that he was kind of a fish out of water. So everything I was doing, I was discovering it as I was doing it. So that way in the game you can kind of experience it. Your character can experience it for the first time as well. So you're playing yourself experiencing the game for the first time, which helps a lot to connect yourself not only with the character in the world, but also to allow you to connect with the world's rules and the world's systems and stuff like that. It's not going to work for every setting, obviously, but I don't know if Philbilly will mind me telling this story. I hope he does. But the first game Philbilly ever played was a game called Gun. It was a homebrew game that I made that was very similar to the video game Borderlands, if anybody has ever played that. Just think kind of along those lines. And I had made it up. It was a homebrew game that I was playing with other people. Phil had not played a role-playing game before, so I was like, come on, give it a shot, talked him into it. And he was very nervous about character creation, so he just kind of made a character that was very similar to himself, which was something I kind of helped him do the first time around. This allowed him to experience the game kind of as himself for the first time, in a way. And then that would allow him to kind of... And if you like that character, that's not wrong. You can then have them personally grow different from you as the plot goes along, and stuff like that. But it'll allow you to experience the game as yourself because you're experiencing the game for the first time. So you don't have to worry about, like, I'm going to pretend to be this thing while also trying to figure out the game. You could just worry about being yourself the entire time. There's nothing wrong with playing yourself, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. That's a really great addendum to that tip. Those two things, I think those are two things that would be
both
so
great
useful,
ideas.
That's so much of the anxiety I see in a lot of people when they walk into here and they for the first time and they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to role play. And the fish out of water, yourself, like trying to figure it out. That's another archetype, that's probably the easiest archetype to pick because it's you. So that's great tip. And there's another one now. This is super nuanced, and this one I'm gonna say, like, if you're just a player and you've never GM'd, you may or may not have even seen this or picked up on this. If you're a GM, this may be a light bulb moment, and you're like, "Oh crap, that's this character. That's this player, this person that is at my table." And if you're an experienced GM, you probably know exactly what I'm saying. Some people, and think if this is you or think if this is a player at your table. Some people have a really hard time communicating as a character. And I mean that in literally they have a hard time saying their words and their actions in the typical role play way, like just talking to somebody and saying, well, I'm mad at you, or just start yelling at another character or acting out in that way. And sometimes it's easier for them to describe the information that they're expressing to the other character.
Yes.
And their tone of voice without actually saying it as the character, because it's just there's kind of a block in their brain. It kind of shuts down. It's just a challenge, And some people aren't comfortable, like, or don't make those individuals necessarily always feel comfortable at their table. And I don't agree with that perspective on that situation, because these are individuals that are just having a challenge getting into the moment. Everybody is going to. I've been GMing for fucking ever, and I still sometimes count on my hands and fingers and my fingers, my modifiers. Okay, I'm not super fast in math. We all have challenges. These people have this type of challenge. You know,
Yeah.
we all have a challenge at the table.
I mean, patience as a game master is a requirement to the
100%.
like, just be patient with your players, and instead of thinking about, like, oh, you can, like, try to never use the words "you can't do that." You know what I mean? There's going to be times where you say you can't do that, but, like, try not to. I think as a player, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do still get called out every once in a while in my game session, because when I speak as the character, I tend to describe him speaking first. So, like, I still, even now, like, I'll be like, he looks down at his feet and he shakes his head, and then pensively he says, and then he says it. And then I'll speak in his voice, like, you know, whatever he's going to say. But, I still get called out. It'll be like, why are you saying all that? Just speak pensively in his words. And that's how I get into the character. That's how I get into the moment. Because I'm not actually speaking pensively as a thuggy gang lord vampire in another world. Yeah. Like, I'm sitting in a garage with you. So, like, that's how I'm getting into the moment. I'm kind of saying everything that's happening so that when I use the words, I'm in the character in the moment. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that definitely as a character, if somebody, like, gives you crap about that, you should give pushback. Because I think that, like, everybody plays differently. And really the core is the character development. Me describing my characters lead up to them hasn't stopped me from having interesting, you know, growing characters, you know what I mean? And it certainly doesn't, and it's certainly not better or worse than the person who doesn't describe what they're doing and just speaks in character whenever they're spoken to, you know? That person could be just as good at their character, you know? So, like, I don't think that
even
that's
better.
I don't, like, find your own style, you know? And the game master should be accommodating to that.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'd like to just point out there. I've heard some pretty bad horror stories about bad game masters.
Yes.
If your game master is trying to control how you talk to that degree at your table, it's not the table for you.
Yeah.
If that's the way that you feel the most comfortable and you just can't communicate outside of that, it just isn't natural for you. You just can't think that fast communicating, because that's just not your system. That's not your way.
Right.
That's not how you're wired. You just find another table, and I'm sorry, that sucks. I personally don't appreciate game masters doing that. I don't think that's fair to players.
Anybody who has been playing role-playing games long enough has had to find a different table at some point, and it's not super fun. I've had to do it multiple different times in my life. Like, I've just looked around and been like, this is not the game for me. I am not having fun. But if you don't mind me making the final tip, that would be have fun. And the minute you're not having fun, don't do it anymore. Because this is a game. And I'm going to say that's a cardinal sin that I've seen game masters do, where they make it feel like everything is in service of the story. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. You came to this table, you sat down at this table to have fun playing role-playing games. The minute you stop doing that, don't do it. It's not worth it. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Like, you are giving 2 to 6 to possibly even 8 hours of your life to this gaming session. Once a week, maybe, bi-weekly, maybe monthly, whatever. You only get to live for 70 years, bro. Like, just move the fuck on to another table. It's not worth it if you're not having fun. And I'm sorry to get sweary or stuff, but, like, it took me a really long time to realize that in my life. There were a lot of sessions that I, like, no, I gotta go, because I started it. No, I didn't. I could have been like, hey, no, I don't want to play this. This isn't fun. The minute's not fun. I got a kid. I got a wife. I got a dog. I got a YouTube channel and games to write and shit to do.
Real life.
I'm not going to spend 4 hours here not having fun. I'm just not. Now when I sit down at a table, it probably seems a little brash to other people. When I sit down at a table, I directly tell the game master and all other players, the minute I stop having fun here, I will not be here. It is nothing against you guys. It is nothing against you personally. If I don't like this game and I'm not having fun, I'm not going to come to it. Period.
Right.
Like, I just value my time too much for that. And you should too out there. So if you're playing at a table and you're not having fun, don't do it. I had a Star Wars game that I was playing where all I wanted to be was a TIE fighter pilot. First of all, Phil, this is not your Star Wars game. I know you're going to think it's your Star Wars game. You gave me TIE fighter. It was great. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about well before you. Back in my Cleveland Heights days. All I wanted to be was a TIE fighter pilot. I told the guy ahead of time this was the character I wanted to play. He said, sure, no problem. I showed up. It was a table full of Jedis and me, the TIE fighter pilot, with a story for just nothing but Jedis. No fighters, pilots anywhere in it. I was completely useless for like 4 sessions. On the 5th session, I finally got to get into a ship, and he just made it trading punches because it was the D20 system. There was no like cool descriptions or, cool maneuvers in space. No dogfighting. It was just like, all right, you shoot. Now you roll dodge. Now you roll shoot. Now you roll dodge. You blew him up. Good job. That was the time when I was like, that was finally the time where I was like, I'm not going to come back to this.
Right.
It's like, this is not the session for me. I'm out. But I went to 5 of those sessions. Why? There was no reason for me to go 5 of those sessions. I could have just walked away session 1 when he pulled out a map for a conversation. That's right. Miniatures and a map for a conversation. What the fuck? When he did that, I could have been like, I'm fucking out. But like, I didn't, so I literally lost, 10, 12, 20 hours of my life to that dumbass game session? As a player, you have the right to be like, I don't like this. I want to do something else. And that's fine. This is a recreational thing. It is not a responsibility. It is not an obligation. It is a recreational activity. And that is what you should be looking at it as. And nobody should be giving you shit about not wanting to do something you don't have fun doing if it's for fun. It's not like they're paying you to do this, That's
right.
Groups are real bad about that. They'll be like, oh, Jim isn't coming again? Why isn't Jim coming? Who the fuck cares? Jim's doing something else. Let him do his thing, man. It's ridiculous. Like, that's his life. This is a recreational fun thing. If he's finding fun doing something else, good on him, I think that, like, that is something that, like, just always irks me about tables when people give people hard times about that, and then players who feel obligated to do it. You're not.
100% agree. 100% agree. I think we've given everybody at least some things to think about.
Nice tight episode here. Nice tight episode.
Yeah. It's not too bad, and I think there's going to be people out there that can use this information. I think it's going to be helpful.
There's people out there who will scream at the radios and go, "None of this is right."
That's that. There's that too. Yeah,
it's an obligation.
Well, why don't we wrap it up, Zach?
Sure.
I think we've come to a good stopping point. Is there anything you want to plug before we say adios for the day?
Why, yes, Wiz, there is, and I probably edited it in because I do all the editing and I have the ability to do that. But we sell shirts now for Old Man Gaming. It's the video game side shirts, but we're selling them on WizardsRespite.com. So you can actually get all of our merchandise on WizardsRespite.com should you want to. We have just 2 shirts up. It's one basic design with like an inverted black-white quality to it that's really fun. I don't own one yet, which is not a good sign, but other people do, and they say they're really comfortable. So please check out those shirts. As far as TTRPGs goes, I don't have an exact date yet, but our next actual play will be coming in June. It will be season 1 and is a Doctor Who actual play, not in the actual Doctor Who game, but in single mod with a lot of heavy modification. I'm really excited for that one. I think it's something special, and that will be coming out in June, so please look out for that. Other than that, we've got Astral Drive bi-weekly on Wednesday nights, and then we have TMNT once a month, and this bi-weekly as well.
Yeah, and as always, this episode and all of the shows that we're just talking about can also be seen at thewizardsrespite.com. It's a website dedicated to all things TTRPG and nerddom in general. And yeah, check that out, wizardsrespite.com. That's also obviously where you can get Zach shirts. We have all kinds of products, shirts there. TTRPG, obviously RPG themed. And yeah, for today, thanks for listening. I hope you guys got a few tips out of this. And until next time, keep rolling them dice.